the SDA hierarchy have laid the foundation. Now, I want to be clear on this. I am not saying that the different people that have been in these positions are absolutely 100% fully aware of what they've gotten themselves into. They may have been, they may not have been, and we cannot judge their motives. All we can do is look at what has happened. Now, I spoke about this previously, the 11th Annual Symposium on the Role of Religion and Faith-Based Organizations in International Affairs. This was a symposium that was held this year. I spoke about it on the Cosmic Agenda number 2. I've actually revamped the thumbnails for that. So if people are looking for the videos of that on my YouTube channel, the second picture is what you need to look for. But in that symposium, it was about them talking about the Pact for the Future that had been made in 2024. And they were talking about how we can actually all work together. Now, this is another website still talking about this symposium. And it says, it mentions a Seventh-day Adventist person. It says the Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Seventh-day Adventist Church and one of the symposium's founding members. So the Seventh-day Adventist Church, sorry, I should have made that a bit bigger the first time around. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was the founding member, or one of the founding members. There was 3 of them. And this is another article talking about it. So it was looking at the vital role of faith-based organizations addressing urgent challenges such as climate change, human rights violation, and peace building. And once again, it says that there would be a representative at that symposium from the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we have, as a church, had people from the hierarchy representing us at this symposium to try and implement the Pact for the Future. Now, the Pact for the Future was also about that weekly rest, ensuring equal opportunities around having synchronized rest time each week. Now, we've spoken a lot about the official statements that are on our website. And once again, I want to reiterate, it's under the heading, What We Believe. This is not just a side heading. This is a crucial heading. Hank Viljoen, who I've worked with SDA Pearl, actually wrote a sort of a really good synopsis of what happened on Fulcrum 7 at the GC 2025. I'm sure a lot of people are aware, but he actually nicely sort of summarizes things. And what really was the focus of a lot of the movement at that time was, yes, the UN was mentioned, but in terms of the statements, the immunization statement was really the focus. Once again, it's the Lord's mercy that we actually had COVID-19 and all of the things that happened, because we wouldn't have actually realized that statements could be used against us. This actually gave us it alerted us to just how powerful and meaningful these statements are in the scheme of things. This I've shared before as well, but I want to reiterate it. This was a letter that a friend of mine actually received from their employer when they were denying them a religious exemption request. And they actually say, based on the information provided on the Seventh-day Adventist Church website. So if you think these statements are not being looked at other than by kooky people like me, you're wrong. They're being looked at by employers and other people as well. And he actually goes on in the second page of that letter to quote directly from what was the statement at the time. We all know that there's been some minor changes, but substantively it's the same. And then at the end of the letter, he says, whilst we can continue going backwards and forwards with arguments, your main objection is based on religious beliefs. Upon reviewing the documentation, and remember he got that from the website, that has been made available by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, it is clear that the church provides a pathway for you to receive the therapy. And so,
oh boy, there it is.
If you think these statements do not matter, think again. Think again, because we know they matter. They matter very much to employers and to governments. And that's why when you can actually find, I've got the link there if people want to have a look at this. This is the Church State Council organization, which is an Adventist organization. I'll show you a little bit more about it in just a second. But they put this memo out at the time. So I'm just going to look back at the date. So it was February 1, 2021. It says, please do inform church members that the teaching and policy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is pro the therapy. Do encourage people to receive it. And then it went on to say, in many cases, the objection is not religious at all, but is based on health. The belief that the vaccine has a significant risk of harm. Well, my health is related to my spirituality, so it is religious. If I am seriously harmed, as I know people who have been seriously harmed, and I know I often mention his name, Daniel Rosina is one of those, it stops you from having an ability to perform the work the Lord has given you to do. And then they say employers have the right to mandate because the government says so. And the Church State Council does not expect our litigation committee will approve filing any case on behalf of those who refuse the therapy and lose their jobs. So this was a memo that they put out in 2021. They were filled with intent around not providing any kind of support around religious liberty. Now, mandates didn't come in February 2021. They came in later. Now, this is just a little bit of, I didn't know what the Church State Council was. I thought it was like another entity, but it's actually Seventh-day Adventists. As Seventh-day Adventists, we stand in the Protestant and Enlightenment traditions. Now, that to me is like an oxymoron. So this may be why they put out a memo saying what they did. The Enlightenment tradition is what gave birth to the French Revolution. It's where they get the liberty, the original Declaration of Human Rights in the French Revolution, but it was actually false. It wasn't God's view of liberty. So I'm not sure why they say Protestant and Enlightenment, because Protestant separates church and state. You don't need to talk about enlightenment, but maybe there's some clues in that as to why they put out. Now, I just did some little statistics charts on the statements, just so you get a bit of an idea of how problematic these statements are. There are 59 statements altogether. 36% are based on the United Nations ideology, with 19% of the total of the 59% are explicitly mentioning the United Nations. Some of them don't even mention the Bible or Ellen White, but they'll mention the United Nations. 43% are engaged with promulgating political ideology. So that's including the United Nations stuff, as well as other ideologies around influencing the state. I'm not going to read through this long list, but there are 11. Just that 19% works out to be 11. And that's, if you want to have a look at these documents to check for yourself, each of these actually expressly mentions the United Nations or its associated bodies such as the World Health Organization. These ones here use the terminology and ideology of the United Nations, things like brotherhood, things like bridge builders, things like goodwill, solidarity, those kind of words that the United Nations uses about working together with all of our brethren. And when they mean brethren, they do not mean Seventh-day Adventists. They mean the entire human race. In fact, the very last statement, one humanity, is all about how there is no difference between all of us. We're all of one family. That is not true. From the very beginning of Earth's history, there were two families. There was the family of God and the family of Cain. And God has always kept them separate. Abraham was pulled out of Ur. Moses and the Israelites were pulled out of Egypt. They were always to come out and be separate. And then there's these five that call upon governments to implement policies and legislation, which might seem like an okay thing to do when you look at these topics, but we are not to be engaged in political affairs. That's just not something that as Seventh-day Adventists we should be doing. Defending against laws, absolutely, but not requesting laws to be made. And there's more problems than just the United Nations and political entities. So I had a look at all of the statements. It's very long. and boring in some ways. And you really do have to pray as you're reading through it, because they're so cleverly worded that on one hand you think, oh, there's nothing wrong. And then on the other hand, you go, hang on, but why did they say that? That doesn't make sense. That's not theologically sound. So from what I can see, there is 51% that are overtly theologically problematic. And then 49%, they may be theologically okay, but maybe if you look at them, you might disagree with me and you might actually add more to them that are actually really problematic. So there's one that basically says that the Roman Catholic Church has had positive changes recently. There's another one that essentially advocates a magisterium approach to theological differences in our church. Then there's two, that limits evangelism and proselytism. And then there's two that limit our liberty in regards to bodily autonomy. So that's why it goes beyond just the UN thing. But these ones, interestingly, I said earlier when I started that the church has actually undermined our view around the second advent. These particular statements here actually indicate that whoever wrote them thought that maybe we're going to establish a kingdom on this earth, a kingdom of peace, somewhat like the evangelicals believe. And they believe in universalism, which is, i.e., everyone gets saved. So these statements actually attack the judgment, the second advent, and historical eschatology that we've actually held on to as a church. And I'm just going to give you two examples because this is not my focus. I really want to focus on the Sabbath Sunday issue, but this is how problematic it is. Not just the immunization statement. It's not just the statements that are going to be about the Sabbath Sunday issue. It is a huge portion of these statements. So this one, global poverty. Seventh-day Adventists join the global community in supporting the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. These are the precursors to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, just that alone is about the Millennium Development Goals were about ushering in the new millennium of peace. They had a Millennium Summit in the year 2000, and the Attorney General at the time actually said, I hope that this summit actually sees the new millennium of peace. Now, that is the language around the new millennium, the 1,000 years of peace. But they became sustainable development goals in 2015. So maybe the mentality around whether or not we'd actually entered into the millennium had changed, i.e., we had entered in. And it talks about Adventists partner with civil society, governments, and others to establish enduring justice in a broken world. We will never have full justice in this world because this world is not our home. This world is not under the authority of Jesus Christ entirely, so there is no way we can ever establish enduring justice in a broken world unless we think we're actually ushering in the millennium of peace. As followers of Christ, we engage in this task, and this is actually the next paragraph, so they're talking about the enduring justice bit, with determined hope, energized by God's visionary promise of a new heaven and a new earth where there is no poverty or injustice. Now, they've just said they're working towards the task of establishing enduring justice in a broken world. And they're saying that to do that, they're going to bring in the new heaven and the new earth. This is really bad theology. Seventh-day Adventists are called to live imaginatively and faithfully inside the vision of God's kingdom by acting to end poverty now. Now, Jesus says, the poor you will have with you always. We can never establish a millennium of peace in this world where there is enduring justice and no poverty. That is not our remit. We are not asked to do that. This is another statement. So the other one was global poverty, and this one's peace. It is therefore right and proper for Christians to promote peace. I agree, but what kind of peace? The Seventh-day Adventist Church urges every nation to beat its swords into plowshares and its spears into pruning hooks. That's a quote from Isaiah 2:4. But Isaiah 2:5 says that it's only when they walk in the light of the Lord. So if you see nations that have not given their entire heart over, which no nation is going to these days, over to the Lord, there is no way we should be calling upon them to do that. In fact, if you go to Joel, this is what we're to proclaim among the Gentiles: prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is like the valley of Armageddon, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. So they're actually saying that we should be giving a message that is coupled with the establishment of God's kingdom on this earth. That is not the message we are supposed to be giving. And then, of course, it's not just reflected in these statements. If you actually scroll over, this is the homepage, Adventist.org. We looked at what we believe in the statements. But if we go to what we do, the language there is similar kind of language. We believe that no one will be hungry in the new earth. So we have humanitarian agencies like ADRA that are trying to feed the hungry to anticipate this future reality. Are we going to have humanitarian agencies in the new earth? We also believe that no one will be sick or even ignorant in this new earth, which is why we have hospitals and schools everywhere. Each act of service is a preview of God's coming kingdom, a tangible expression of his love in a world that desperately needs hope. This is subtle language, but it is the language of a new millennium of peace.
You know, Sister Joanna, I'm not sure you realize how inspired your whole thing is. I did a video where I did a reaction video to Pastor Randy Skeet, and he has a sermon called "Traitors in the House of God," and that's what he argues. He was showing how even if you feed everyone, you clothe every person who's poor, you feed the hungry, you do all of these humanitarian works. Without the gospel, you've done nothing because you didn't give them the ultimate need. This is not to say we neglect these things. They don't take preeminence above the gospel. And there are systems in the world that are already doing a much better job than we can anyway. We can certainly cooperate as much as we can, use that as an entering wedge, but we should not lay down the mantle of the three angels' messages for the sake of feeding hungry people. It's like there has to be a combination of those two. But anyway, he calls that a traitors in the house of God, people who are actually pushing for this, or people we need to keep an eye on because they don't really have God's best interests at heart. Neither do they care about the benefit of mankind ultimately in the light of eternity. It's totally a waste of time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've got the Maslow's hierarchy, this whole idea that, we reach a state of, I'm trying to remember the word that he uses, but basically a state of enlightenment and actuation or something like that, because we've had our physical needs met, and then we've had our security needs met, and then our social, there's this whole idea. But the reality is that Jesus was able to actually have all of his needs met through the wilderness. And his greatest need was was to have a spiritual experience with God. And he came through the other end. He hadn't eaten for 40 days. Moses did the same. Elijah, has done that as well. And you look throughout the Bible, and it's not physical food that we most need. It's the spiritual food that we most need. And the thing that we've often done as Christians, and it's not just Seventh-day Adventists, is we outsource that kind of care. We should be caring for our neighbors. We should care for those who we walk past in the street that are suffering. Maybe we should invite them into our home. Or do we keep it all very clinical and send our money off to somewhere for someone else to do it in a very, corporate way? That's not actually bringing the gospel to people. That's just bringing food. And God actually, when Jesus came to this earth, he didn't send emissaries on his behalf. He came. And then he gave them bread, both spiritual and physical. In fact, if you look at the feeding of the 5,000, what did he give them first? It was not the physical, it was the spiritual. And so we need to remember that where our priorities lay. But the problem is the reason why people are doing this, they're prioritizing the physical here and now, is because they think this is all we have. And they don't realize the urgency of the time. If they actually could see spiritually Jesus standing just beyond the veil and the winds of strife being held with strained ropes by the angels, they would be warning the people that they're giving the bread to first about the spiritual, crisis that's coming upon them, and then give them the bread as they open the word of God to them. But unfortunately, people think that this is where we're at and we're going to be here for many, many more years. And so whilst the Lord delays his coming, we slumber and sleep. This is from ADRA, the 2018 annual report. Now, they love the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see that they're very much pro implementing the UN's initiatives. In fact, the UN loves them so much that in that year, they gave them $43,931,638 to ensure that they implemented the Sustainable Development Goals. Once again, we are not going to have sustainable development. We're going to have a crisis. The whole world is going to burn up. We should not be, working towards sustainable development. This is what they say. The SDGs are ambitious, but ADRA is committed to designing and implementing projects that support them in the ultimate goal of accomplishing all SDGs by 2030. ADRA is wanting to see Agenda 2030 implemented with gusto. And of course, one of them is this no poverty thing. That's goal number 1. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. In 2024, in October 2024, this article appeared on the ADRA website. ADRA celebrates United Nations Day by emphasizing its global mission. And this is the actual leader of the director of ADRA International United Nations Liaison Office. And he says that reflecting on the UN's theme for that year, which was the world needs the UN and the UN needs us, and how it aligns with ADRA's mission. This is what he says. This theme resonates deeply with us at ADRA. It embodies our collective responsibility in a world that seeks peace, security, and integration. Notice these words of coming together, being collective. We understand that our work at the community level is crucial, though our projects and active participation in the UN working groups, through our projects and active participation in UN working groups, we contribute to global peace initiatives, economic development, and social cohesion. And then he says the UN, representing member states from around the globe, is an invaluable partner in this mission. Together, we can advocate for global peace and forge connections that transcend borders. There is only one Prince of Peace, and that is Christ himself. The UN is not submitted to Christ, not submitted to the truths of the Bible. So it is not an invaluable partner. It is an invaluable enemy of us. It's a valuable enemy of us, but it's a partner of Satan. That's where we need to realize. Psalms chapter 2 says the kings of the earth sit together and they take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed. Do we believe the Bible? Because that's what it says. We need to actually believe what the Lord has said to us and stop fiddling around with these kind of unions and thinking that it's actually fulfilling some kind of mission.
It's not going to happen. You said it best. When you listen to the way they're describing some of their plans and goals, it's no different than what Genesis 11 speaks about of the Tower of Babel. It's the same concept. They all had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, and that they found a plain, and there they began to build together this city. The first city builder, Nimrod, the whole idea was, hey, we don't want to believe what God says. about the fact he will not send another flood on the earth, but we are going to make our own system of worship. We are going to save ourselves by the hands of our own works, by the works of our hands. It's no different.
Yes.
It's just like the
Yes.
Babylonian system all over again.
It is, and it's really interesting. I had a look at the UN buildings. One of them actually looks like Noah's Ark. If you really look at it, you kind of go, I didn't even, like, I was just looking at it going, wow, it looks like the side of an ark. Like there's the
Yeah.
big tall building and then there's a building beside it. And I was just like really struck by it. And then I'm thinking, am I the only one that's picked up on the fact that it looked like Noah's Ark? And interestingly enough, the Jehovah's Witnesses also think it looks like an ark. But I just thought, wow, that's really interesting, because it's about saving themselves from not the flood of water, but the flood of fire that's coming shortly.
Yeah. Correct.
Now, just so that people, because people will go, oh, that's ADRA, that's not the church. Why are you talking about ADRA? Because, we're most concerned about the church and all the rest of it. Well, this is what the former president said at the spring meeting in 2025, so earlier this year. He says, ADRA is doing a wonderful work in the name of Jesus. Now, on that point, if you look at what I've just read previously, you decide for yourself, is that a true statement? But then he goes on to say, but the organization ADRA represents the Adventist church in so many ways and is very closely connected to the church. So if the head of our church says that ADRA basically represents our church, then he does know, and it is true. It says Adventist Development Relief Agency. So when people look at it, they know that it's connected. Now, onto this issue. These are the 4 statements that all deny our religious liberty in relation to the seventh-day Sabbath. Interestingly, they are all linked to the UN, and in particular UN religious liberty documents. But unfortunately, they actually deny religious liberty. How clever is that? They say religious liberty, but by the same token, they deny it. Now, why is it that we have swallowed this? Because the powers of the world went out fishing and our church leadership swallowed the bait. They got told that there'd be peace, there'd be prosperity, and there'd be security if only they joined up. And consequently, I just feel Isaiah 52:3, the beginning of it says, for thus says the Lord, you've sold your souls for naught. We get nothing from it. Not really. I mean, ADRA gets money for it. But what do we get from it? What do the individuals of the church get from it? We get nothing. Nothing from this association except for heartache and mandates that remove our liberty. Why do we do this?